Splinter Cell Blacklist is a lot better than I've ever given it credit for. Dare I say it, Blacklist is underrated among fans of the series. And Blacklist certainly doesn't deserve to be blamed for the demise of the Splinter Cell franchise. The blame there rests on a combination of Ubisoft's reluctance to make games that can't be monetised beyond recognition, and the poor quality of Splinter Cell Double Agent and Conviction. At first glance, Blacklist looks a lot like more of Conviction. The mark and execute system returns in Blacklist, as does Conviction's prominent use of text to mark up locations and interactable parts of the environment. In addition, Blacklist can be played a lot like Conviction. If you want to treat a stealth game as a shooter, then you can do that with more aggressive and loud options than ever before. Although I'd still question why you would want to do that. It would be like insisting FIFA games contain the option to pick up the ball and run with it when you should probably just play Madden instead. However, Blacklist excels compared to Conviction because you don't have to play this way. In fact, the game's scoring system and economy punish you for adopting an all-out action style. Blacklist provides plenty of stealth options, including alternate routes and shadows to remain unseen, gadgets to distract guards, and silent weapons to take them out without being heard. Just because you can play Blacklist as an action game doesn't mean you have to, and the stealth on display here is the most satisfying the series has had since Chaos Theory. That's quite an achievement considering Blacklist was developed by an entirely new studio, Ubisoft Toronto, working on its first project. That's not to say all the developers themselves were inexperienced, of course. In addition to having ready access to the wider Ubisoft community, the new studio was headed up by the excellent Jade Raymond, who led the creation of the entire Assassin's Creed franchise, plus other experienced developers such as Alexandra Parisot and Maxime Belland, plus a bunch of the people who worked on Conviction. Despite being new, Ubisoft Toronto succeeded where the more experienced teams of Ubisoft Shanghai and Ubisoft Montreal failed with Double Agent and Conviction respectively, and made a fun and faithful Splinter Cell experience. Ubisoft Toronto worked hard to achieve a balance between the desires of hardcore fans and the wider market. As gamers, particularly the type of gamers who create and or watch YouTube videos going in depth about games, we often forget that YouTube comment sections, Reddit discussions and Twitter posts don't necessarily represent the general population of people who buy games. It's easy for me to say that Splinter Cell needs to return to its stealth roots and forgo all the action, but the evidence doesn't back that up. Belland stated that when developing Blacklist they worked hard to include stealthy options for those who wanted them, but they couldn't ignore data that showed the vast majority of people who played these games would take a more action-oriented route. According to Belland, open quote, "If you go on our forums everyone wants stealth, but every time we bring in playtesters they grab their controllers and want to shoot someone," close quote. Unfortunately, this fits in with a broader trend, which is that stealth doesn't sell. I hate to say it as much as you hate to hear it, but it's true. Hitman 2016 underperformed, so much so that IO Interactive was able to execute a management buyout to regain independence from Square Enix. I know the 2016 game had that weird episodic structure, but Hitman 2 in 2018 was a full release and still didn't set the world alight, despite providing great value when combined with all the Hitman 2016 content you could bring forward. And then there's Dishonored, another critical darling of a series that didn't sell well enough to secure its future. Assassin's Creed has moved away from stealth to being an action game first and foremost, with stealth elements sort of thrown in as a bonus. With all this in mind, I'm amazed and delighted that Ubisoft Toronto went to as much effort as it did to include stealth options in Blacklist, because it would have been easy to ignore it. Jade Raymond stated that she wanted to make the series more casual, claiming previous entries had been too grueling for a larger player base. While that early soundbite wasn't promising, the end result was a game with plenty of grueling options for those who do want to suffer. Making something more accessible and, for want of a better word, casual doesn't have to mean removing the more intense content. It can just be the addition of more options, and that's what Blacklist did. You'd think with both action and stealth fans catered to, Blacklist would do fairly well, but alas it only sold around 2 million copies in the first 3 months of release, when Ubisoft had been hoping for something closer to 5 million. The poor sales are a bit of a mystery. Reviews were good with 8s and 9s from the major publications, and it released on PS3, Xbox 360 and PC just before the PS4 and Xbox One came out, so there was a huge built-in console base of people who could have bought the game but didn't. Blacklist also came out on the Wii U, adding a potential audience rumoured to be in the dozens. Actions often speak louder than words. The people spoke and they didn't want what Blacklist was offering. I can't blame people for abandoning the Splinter Cell series after Double Agent and Conviction, but they missed out because Blacklist has a lot to offer. even around the story and characters, which are not areas previous games have handled well. The presentation of the story is excellent, the characters get more time to shine than ever before, there's a decent villain, and while the story is still a little on the generic side, I do think it's probably the best one in the series, albeit Splinter Cell is not a series known for its excellent stories. The most obvious and superficial benefit Blacklist has over its predecessors is the quality and quantity of its cutscenes. Part of that can obviously be attributed to technological improvements such as the excellent motion capture technology, but the benefits go far beyond just looking nice. For me, it wasn't so much the improved quality of the cutscenes as it was the increase in quantity, namely there are now cutscenes to link up the end of one mission with the beginning of the next. Watching Fisher question someone he's captured or look on as the team links the clues together for the next target is far more satisfying than being dumped randomly into a new location, even if you are given a few lines by way of a mission briefing to explain it. In some of the previous videos I mentioned feeling a little disconnected from the main story at times, and that was why. This isn't the case in Blacklist. The analogy that comes to mind is comparing a story being told via a single issue of a comic book to the same story spread out over a full-length novel, assuming the story is worth telling over a longer period of time and with a quality writer of course. One version is a sequence of events quickly being ticked off to move from A to B to C with little time for reflection. The other is an explanation of the how and the why those events happen. The former can feel a bit like reading a Wikipedia summary of a story, the latter feels like experiencing the story. Strangely, Blacklist features Fisher's team in the way my mind thought all the games in the series did. As I've replayed the earlier games for these videos, I've been surprised at how little time was devoted not just to the main story but to the team. My memory tricked me into thinking each game had short cutscenes with Grimm's daughter and Lambert between every mission, and I could have sworn Fisher's daughter Sarah was more involved. But that very much wasn't the case. Chaos Theory did a good job with mission banter, so Fisher's relationship with Lambert and Grimm's daughter was mainly built up there. However, we never see much of them between missions. One minute Fisher was in New York and the next Japan with little or no explanation of why. Double Agent killed off Lambert and Conviction gave Grimm's daughter a personality transplant and made her into a field agent. I guess I thought there was more character development than was actually present. My head filled in the gaps. Blacklist gives me what I thought was always there, namely strong team building. Oh, and you can phone Sarah between missions. If this had been present in the earlier games, her fake death and then eventual reunion would have been a lot more powerful. Now my nostalgia means that despite the lack of actual conversations, I'm most fond of the team consisting of Fisher, Lambert and Grimm's daughter, and likely always will be. However, Blacklist quickly puts together a team of 4 or arguably 5 individuals that I quickly gelled with. We get to see more of Grimm's daughter in action than the previous 5 games combined, and can now appreciate her as more than just a voice on the radio, or in the case of Conviction, an awkwardly shoehorned in field agent. The young and cocky new tech guy, Charlie, annoyed me at first and then slowly grew on me, exactly as the devs intended, I'm sure.
Anything else, Chief?
Let Sarah know I'll be offline for a few days.
Sarah, she's still single, right? No? I'm gonna take that as a no.
Stop hacking base IT, we're guests here.
Yeah, but they make it so easy!
And Briggs makes enough of an impact that if Fisher were to retire, I'd be more than happy for the franchise to continue with Briggs. Probably the best example of the improved character writing in Blacklist is seen with Coben, who gets a slight redemption arc of sorts here. Coben was in Conviction as the guy who Lambert and Grimm's daughter used to fake the death of Sam's daughter Sarah. He's a dodgy guy at best who isn't especially deserving of sympathy, but he gets the chance to help a few times during Blacklist and even stops the plane from crashing. By the end he's done enough that you can tell he's going to be a key player going forward. Well, he would be if there were more Splinter Cell stories. There's also a lot more screen time given to the bad guy, Majid Sadiq, brilliantly portrayed by Carlo Rota.
Because your president sends men like you to countries where you don't belong!
Go to hell.
Sadiq isn't one of the all-time great video game villains or anything, but he gets enough screen time that you at least care about defeating him personally, and not just the threat his group poses. Only Chaos Theory really came close to this by using Douglas Shetland, a friend of Fisher's, as the main baddie, and even he wasn't the ultimate top dog we took down in the final mission. In total, that's 6 main characters I can remember by name without having to look them up. which is about double what I could do in the other games. Oh, and I can even remember the name of President Caldwell, and Vic Costa is in here briefly, so that's 8 I guess. There's one negative though when it comes to the characters, and it's a biggie. Fisher kind of sucks in Blacklist. To get the obvious out of the way, yes, Sam Fisher has a new voice actor. Michael Ironside does not return, and people were mad until they realised that Ironside was replaced at his own behest because he was battling thyroid and prostate cancer at the time, and quite sensibly wanted to devote his energy to that. The weird thing is, this isn't a case of gamers overreacting and getting mad before having all the facts. Well, it is a bit. However, this situation was made more complicated than it needed to be by Ubisoft itself stating that Ironside was replaced due to the demands of the motion capture performance and the need for a younger actor to play Fisher. I'm assuming Ubisoft gave this as the reason because Ironside specifically asked them not to mention his cancer, in which case fair enough, although it does seem odd that the team would make up a reason that would then make people mad. Perhaps, like all the best lies, there was a hint of truth to it. The motion capture requirements made the work more demanding, and that is why Ironside couldn't do it in the condition he was in at the time. I'm not sure. Either way, the story has a happy ending. Ironside recovered, and he even made a return as Fisher in Ghost Recon Wildlands. The problem with Fisher in Blacklist isn't the actor who plays him, well, not directly anyway. Eric Johnson is a solid actor, and the behind the scenes material makes it clear he got invested in the role and gave it his all. The issue is partly one Johnson can't do much about. He's simply too young. By the time Blacklist rolls around, Fisher is supposed to be about 55 years old, and Johnson is clearly a lot younger. You can hear that youth in his voice. It's the voice of someone who hasn't yet been brought down by how shitty the world is. He's too optimistic. Ironside's gravelly voiced Fisher had a fantastic same shit different day vibe to it. He's a relic of another age, and he probably realises it's time for him to retire and for a new group of kids to take over. Which I guess they do, except instead of replacing Fisher with a younger recruit like Briggs, they give Fisher a younger actor. Even worse than the voice though is the visual appearance. Fisher looks younger than we've ever seen him. He's supposed to be the world-weary kind of guy who would moan about kids these days and their video games while saying "I'm too old for this shit" to anyone in earshot. Instead, the Fisher in Blacklist looks like the kind of guy to not only play Call of Duty, but to get banned from Twitch for a heated gamer moment. And of course, he's more athletic than ever. This is a tough one because, let's face it, no one wants to play as a geriatric undercover agent. Actually, I kind of do now that I think about it. Anyway, his athletic abilities are still a touch extreme. It's one thing to hang from ledges when necessary, it's another to quickly scale up mountains in a way that would have Nathan Drake struggling to keep up. The animations are impressive, mind you. I love little touches like how Fisher goes down this ladder facing forward instead of just using the generic ladder animations. The young voice and body and increased athleticism could all be forgiven if Fisher wasn't such a dick. There's no other way to put it. I don't like Fisher much in Blacklist. Fisher is in charge this time, and if this is how he's going to act, then it's a good job Lambert was there all those years. He's gruff and short with people all the time and overly serious. I know the situation is serious, but he used to crack the odd joke every now and again. Even Zack Snyder would tell this character to lighten up a bit once in a while. One moment in particular stood out. Near the end of a mission, Fisher is captured and Briggs saves the day at the last minute, at the cost of the bad guy escaping. Fisher is furious at Briggs for this because you're always supposed to put the mission first. I do slightly understand what they were going for. Fisher is prepared to die for the mission and he thinks his team should be prepared to let him die in turn if it is for the greater good. So I can understand Fisher's frustration in the heat of the moment where he tells Briggs he's off the team, but for him to stick with this feels immature and against his character. Maybe this is a problem caused by the optional moments in other games. You see, my Fisher didn't kill Dahlia Tal when ordered. He went out of his way to save 2 pilots against Lambert's orders, and he refused to kill Lambert to maintain his cover. However, if we look at the canon story, Fisher does kill Lambert, and maybe he doesn't do those other good deeds. Maybe Ubisoft Toronto does in fact have a better grip on who Fisher is than I do, but the thing is it fell off to me. Blacklist portrays Fisher as a bad leader. Later in the story, the IT guy Charlie makes a mistake and wants to own up to Fisher about it. Grimm's daughter has to pull him to one side and tell Charlie to keep his secret because she can't protect him from Fisher. She clearly fears Fisher will overreact like he did with Briggs, and she's bright enough to know that the team needs Charlie and can't afford to lose him just because of Fisher's temper. That's not the Fisher I know, and even if I'm wrong, it's not something I want to be wrong about. I don't like this Fisher. Blacklist takes place about 2 years after Conviction. Fisher is working with Vic Costa at a private security company until Costa is injured in a terrorist attack that sees Fisher brought in by the US president to lead the new 4th Echelon group. If you remember, in Conviction most of 3rd Echelon went rogue and tried to kill the president, so it was unsurprisingly disbanded. Personally, I don't think I would have gone with 4th Echelon as the name for this new team. For one thing, it's an unwritten rule that you don't have a 4th thing these days. Once you get to 4, you reboot and start from scratch, or stick with the previous name and put a subtitle on it. And with 3rd Echelon so unbelievably disgraced, do you really want a constant reminder of what came before? The German government after World War II didn't call itself the Fourth Reich for good reason. Anyway, a group called the Engineers takes credit for the attack on the US base in Guam and demands that the US withdraw all its troops stationed overseas. If the US fails to comply, the Engineers will attack American targets in accordance with certain themes of American imperialism, such as American consumption, American fuel and American blood, a bit like murdering by way of the 7 deadly sins in 7. The list of targets is known as the Blacklist. Missions are typically either Fisher tracking down a lead, such as Coben to get information on where the Engineers plan to attack, or dealing with and minimising the damage from the attacks themselves. A mistake by Charlie leaves the 4th Echelon base, a plane called Paladin, open to attack and the Engineers sabotage it to try and force a crash. The group only survives thanks to Coben's piloting skills. 4th Echelon successfully stops the American Freedom attack on a subway, so the Engineers respond by speeding up the timetable. The Engineers then succeed with their attack on American fuel, so the US president relents and agrees to work with the terrorists. The US also implements its continuity of government procedures, which involves putting the people who run the country into bunkers, so presumably that consists of the president, vice president, Jeff Bezos and the Disney Corporation. The president orders Fisher to stand down, but he refuses, partly because he's disgusted at the idea of the US negotiating with terrorists, and partly because he thinks this is all a trap. He doesn't believe the real goal of the Engineers is to withdraw all US forces from overseas. What they're really after is information, and by forcing the US to implement its continuation of government procedure, it's now ensured that all of the most important information the US has is in one place, a bunker, with one man, the Secretary of Defense. To the Defense Secretary's credit, he endures a lot of torture, often depicted quite graphically in the game. However, he won't be able to hold out forever. Briggs realises this and executes the Secretary in cold blood. Fisher hunts down Sadiq, and via an unarmed stealth boss fight, Fisher captures him and the player is forced to invoke the 5th freedom, i.e. the right to kill. Even though you have to give the execute order, Fisher doesn't actually go ahead and kill him, taking him captive instead, but letting the president tell the world that Sadiq was in fact killed. This ending was a bit of a mess. I'm not sure why the game wants you to think you're gonna kill Sadiq and makes you give the order only for Fisher to ignore the instruction. It didn't help either that my game broke here and I didn't get to watch the final cutscene. I could only hear it play out over a blank screen and then I had to go to YouTube to watch the rest. I will say that was the only bug I experienced, it's otherwise a smooth game. The story is dark, gruesome and lacking in any levity whatsoever, but the addition of plenty of cutscenes makes events much easier to follow, even if much of it is just a convoluted way of saying we need to go to this place because a person is there who has a lead to the next place. As discussed, all the conversations make the team into fully fleshed out characters instead of just voices on radios. The Engineers are a competent group of terrorists who are clearly worth fearing. They are led by an ex-MI5 agent and other former intelligence operatives, and they know what they're doing. While 4th Echelon has some success in stopping the planned attacks, the Engineers accomplish more than enough to feel like a real threat and succeed in their attack on American fuel. Plus, their main goal feels a little more grounded in reality. Ultimately, they want to bring down the US by turning other countries against it, which is not dissimilar to other Splinter Cell stories, except the way they go about it is to get classified information and to release it to the public and let events handle themselves. The other Splinter Cell stories featured attacks on US soil, but typically those attacks were the end goal. In Blacklist, the Engineers know that simply letting off a few bombs won't bring down an entire country. The bombs are a means to another end, and this extra level of thought on behalf of the Engineers made me see them as more of a substantial threat. Plus, the way the whole thing was just a scheme to force the US to implement continuity of government measures was a neat touch, and showed how former intelligence operatives might use their expertise to be more of a threat than generic terrorists. On a less positive note, the game doesn't provide any payoff for moments of player choice or major story beats. For example, after interrogating key people, the player is given the choice to kill them or spare their life. This happens at least 3 times. However, I could not find one single example of these choices having any consequence whatsoever, and on one occasion the guy kills himself anyway. This might be to allow players to maintain no kill playthroughs, however given that this is in a cutscene anyway, it shouldn't really be counted in those statistics. The decisions aren't referenced in dialogue and they certainly don't change how Fisher acts going forward. Likewise, there's that whole mess with Briggs. Fisher lambasted Briggs for not putting the mission first and said he was off the team. Obviously at some point Fisher was always going to forgive Briggs and let him back into the team, but Briggs only sits out one mission and that was a mission he wouldn't have been able to join in on anyway. Given that Briggs is very much a side character, I'm not even sure many people would have noticed his absence. Worse though is that there's no reason for Fisher to have a change of heart. Fisher and Briggs don't sit down and have a chat. Fisher doesn't make Briggs promise to always put the mission first. Fisher just decides he would quite like Briggs on the next mission, so he includes him. I also don't like the way Briggs kills the defence secretary. At the risk of reading too much into it, I think the developers were trying to portray a change in Briggs with this action. Earlier on he wasn't prepared to let Fisher die for the team, but now we see that he's prepared to do anything. However, this clearly isn't a good parallel. We don't know that Briggs wouldn't have killed the defence secretary even before that row with Fisher. A far more interesting scenario would have seen Briggs forced to choose between the mission and Fisher again. Then we could see clearly whether he has taken on board the lesson Fisher tried to teach it. This could also have been a cool player choice moment. It could have been up to the player to decide whether to have Briggs save Fisher or not. You could leave Fisher behind and complete the story with Briggs if you wanted to. Fisher could even die here. In fact, I think having Fisher die as a result of a lesson he forced into his subordinate would be an apt way to go out. Or maybe Fisher could survive and admit he was wrong to be so black and white about the whole affair and accept that teammates will look out for each other. Basically, I just wanted the characters to think about the consequences of their actions instead of just acting on autopilot. Speaking of which, there's also a complete lack of self-reflection from anyone in the team regarding the engineers' claimed motive of having the US withdraw all of its overseas troops. While the Splinter Cell games have always been about working for and protecting the US, there have been plenty of moments where the game has made you think about what you're doing and why. Fisher and co were never anti-American, but they weren't naive either. There were subtle little digs and references about the morality of the role the US played in the world, and even if it never led to much, I did appreciate the effort at self-awareness. There's absolutely none of that in Blacklist. Fisher, Grimsdotter, Briggs, Charlie and everyone else on the team is a card-carrying, patriotic American who'd rather die than sing the national anthem slightly off-key. As a result, the whole thing comes off a lot more Call of Duty, gung-ho America, no questions asked than many of the previous games.
Hoorah!
It's not like there was a lack of opportunity either. Most of Conviction took place in the US and was concerned with a domestic terror plot, so it's understandable that international affairs weren't discussed much in that one. However, Blacklist is not only an incredibly international game in terms of map locations, the entire threat revolves around US troops stationed overseas. At no stage does Fisher offhandedly mention that perhaps the engineers have a point. No one expresses any sympathy for the residents of countries with an unwanted US military presence. This omission became unforgivable in my book once Fisher was tasked with breaking into Guantanamo. It would have been so easy for someone to say something about this vile place, but it's treated like a normal prison break-in mission where you can't harm the guards because they're friendlies. At the bare minimum, Fisher could have threatened the guy he was questioning by pointing out that people in Guantanamo don't have basic human rights. At least that would be acknowledging it. Or he could say something when you walk past all the prisons containing people held without trial. How about an offhand mention of how Guantanamo is still a thing in 2013 when this takes place? I'd have even settled for a dig at Barack Obama here. Not by name of course, but Fisher could say how it's weird that even under a liberal president, such as the one in the game, this place still wasn't shut down. Anything that would suggest the developers weren't so blind to what they were doing by including this travesty of a place in a video game. I take no issue with developers including places like Guantanamo in games, but they have to deal with the location and not just include it for shock value. Wolfenstein The New Order included a mission where you had to infiltrate a Nazi labour camp, but it didn't shy away from what the place was, and it certainly didn't present the guards as innocent. Fun fact about this one actually, during this Guantanamo mission you're not only prohibited from killing guards with instant failure if you do, you can't even kill the dogs on patrol. You can kill guard dogs in other levels, but for some reason American guard dogs need an extra level of protection. I mean, come on, give me a break. They aren't cats. It says a lot that such a bland and unchallenging story is almost certainly the best in the series, but the bar has never been that high. That's not the case for the basic gameplay experience, which has consistently changed from one entry to the next, and ranged from excellent to terrible. This time, in an effort to keep as many people happy as possible, Ubisoft Toronto included 3 distinct playstyles: Ghost, Panther and Assault. You're not locked into any one style. You start each mission with enough gear to complete it any way you fancy. You're simply rated at the end of the mission based on your performance, with more points available for Ghost and Panther than Assault. I love this system, not because of the way you are scored at the end, but simply because the developers thought about Ghost playthroughs and it shows, especially when compared to Conviction. That said, the Ghost style isn't presented exactly how I'd like it. To me, a Ghost run means you leave behind no evidence that you were even there. Well, the odd fingerprint or the absence of whatever it was you stole aside. Not only do you not kill anyone, you don't even knock them out. You can distract guards to get them out of the way, but they must never know for certain you were there, as they would if they woke up an hour after being knocked out. The Ghost mode in Blacklist is really a cross between a Ghost run and a pacifist run. In addition to getting points for leaving enemies completely unaware of your presence, you also get points for non-lethal takedowns of enemies, which I don't think quite fits what they were going for. This might have been better had the non-lethal options been significantly harder to use, but they aren't. Sure, you have less ammo for your main non-lethal weapons, however ammo can be restocked regularly during each mission outside of the hardest difficulty. You also have lots of other non-lethal options like sleeping gas and even a drone that shocks enemies. And the distinction between lethal and non-lethal melee takedowns is largely meaningless. This is a minor gripe though, because you can always exercise a bit of self-control and set your own rules. Just because you can knock people out doesn't mean you usually have to. The vast majority of the game is designed with the true Ghost spirit in mind. To my knowledge, this is the first time a Splinter Cell game has been developed specifically to include a Ghost approach. The original games were tough to play as shooters, forcing you to stick to stealth, however they never much cared how stealthy you were. It wasn't until Chaos Theory that the game attempted to score your performance on each mission, and actively suggested that enemies should be left alive where possible. The result is that you can go into each encounter confident in the notion that you can be a Ghost if you want to, a stark contrast to Conviction, which spent much of its time specifically telling the player that a Ghost run is not an option. Being a Ghost isn't easy, mind you, not if you want to complete the optional objectives. Most missions have 3 optional requirements: a laptop to hack, a high value target to capture alive, and a dead drop to find. Capturing the targets can be especially challenging when playing as a Ghost. For example, there's one section where you need to escape from a residence, which is fairly easy to do without being spotted. You just climb up a pipe and move over to the next section. However, capturing the high-level guard roaming around with all the other guards, with snipers on the roof and flares lighting up your surroundings, is genuinely quite challenging. I always aim to play with a Ghost approach. That goes for all the Splinter Cell games, and most stealth games come to think of it. I even tried it in Conviction for a long time before giving up. What usually ends up happening is that I play as a Ghost for the first half or so of the mission and then gradually become less Ghost-like and more Panther-like as things progress. If everything goes to hell or if I'm simply forced to by the game, then Assault is used to wrap things up. This is quite common near the ends of levels, unfortunately, with Fisher getting rushed by groups of enemies and having to fight his way out. It might be possible to still take them all out via stealthy means, however some of the rooms were way too small for me to attempt this. There are some cool parts though, such as when Briggs provides cover or when the plane is attacked on the ground and you can sneak around and knock people out in the chaos. I kept with this approach for Blacklist, although I enjoyed using the sniper rifle once that was unlocked and had to actively restrain myself from just headshotting everyone I came across. Regardless though of whether I killed or knocked out enemies, I loved staying unseen as much as possible, and I found Blacklist made this approach the most rewarding it's been since Chaos Theory. My main criticism is that the Ghost options aren't as interesting as they could be. Levels are long but still quite linear, so it's always clear where you have to go, and the challenge is simply finding the secret path that's always there. Typically this takes the form of a pipe to climb, of which there are many, or a vent to crawl through. You can't lockpick doors or hack terminals, so I found myself starting each new area by looking around at the ground for a vent or at the walls or ceiling for a pipe to climb, and more often than not one or both were available. It's a bit like the Metro games in that respect. That said though, there were many times when I didn't spot the route I should have taken until the end of the room or area, which is something I always love discovering. There's nothing better than taking ages to stealthily make your way to the end of a room and then finding that you could have just crawled through a vent instead. However, quite a few of these ghost routes were so easy that I felt like I was cheating. One area let me sneak from start to finish simply by climbing on top of a large pipe and then walking to the end. Another room was full of prominent pipes to climb which would take you from one end to another without really any problems. I was a little on autopilot at these moments. Mostly though, the challenge is decent, especially on the harder difficulty settings. I've not discussed difficulty settings much in my other Splinter Cell videos because I was always disappointed in how little difference they made. Sure, you take more damage if you're shot on the harder settings, but up until Conviction the idea was not to be spotted in the first place. The enemies were also more alert and quicker to spot you. However, too many of the older games had issues with inconsistent AI around spotting Fisher, and that made it hard to know whether the difficulty was at play or just busted AI. Blacklist has 4 difficulty levels available from the start: Novice, Normal, Realistic and Perfectionist. I went with Realistic and highly recommend it. Perfectionist has a few additional restrictions, such as not being able to resupply during levels, although given how much ammo you have I'm not convinced that makes a huge difference. There was one moment where I regretted being on Realistic difficulty and was glad I wasn't on Perfectionist. At one point you have to burst into a train through the window, except there are 2 enemies right next to where you land. They can kill you very quickly, and it took quite a few attempts before I realised I had to dash to the right to find a piece of cover. Even knowing where the cover was, I still nearly died. Publishers and developers love to talk about how intelligent their AI is, but more often than not the AI ends up being fairly similar from game to game. I've lost count of the number of times I've heard developers say that enemies will notice if their friend is missing or doesn't respond to radio check-ins, and then I've not seen that play out at all during the game, or perhaps it has but only once or twice in a highly scripted area, or when a guard has practically tripped over an unconscious body. In Blacklist, enemies are aggressive. If you take out one of their friends, they will notice when they don't see them on their patrol route and they will go to investigate. Now, I admit they will often stroll right up to an unconscious body and practically walk into Fisher's grasp one after the other, but I still felt under constant pressure. I knew that for every enemy I knocked out I risked setting the guards on a higher alert level. Enemies will also investigate if a guard doesn't respond to radio check-ins, and again this is consistent, not just at fixed locations. Similarly, if you shoot out a camera, the guard presumably in charge of monitoring the camera feed will radio out to tell guards in the area to be alert for an intruder. And of course, shooting out lights gets people's attention too, although the prior games did that. While the AI is more consistent, it could still use some work. During one section, Fisher has to plant a bug on a van and therefore needs to remain unseen. You can shoot out lights and the enemies will get suspicious, but that won't end the mission. Except sometimes it does, and I've no idea why. Speaking of niggles, someone made the horrible decision to have the hide in cover button double up as a jump over cover button if Fisher is moving. There is already a separate jump over cover button, so there was no need for this. I kept trying to run into cover and would instead jump over it. Any slight press of a directional button seems to make Fisher leap over the cover instead of go behind it, which more than once led to my death. Anyway, niggles aside, I always had respect for the enemy's abilities and didn't take them lightly. Part of my motivation for sticking to a true ghost run was simply to make my life easier by not having guards go on full alert all the time. In my Conviction video I listed all the major gameplay features that had been removed, mainly stealth ones. I'm pleased to say that Blacklist brings a lot of them back. First of all, you can move bodies again. This might not seem like a big deal, but by removing that feature in Conviction, the game was telling you there was no point to staying undetected. That's no longer the case. There are even designated hiding spots like the Hitman games where you can store bodies to guarantee they won't be found. You even get points at the end for hiding them this way. Fisher's night vision is back, which is pretty huge considering how iconic those 3 lights are on his goggles. More importantly, you actually need to use it at times because Blacklist has darkness and shadows. Now, it's rarely the deep pitch black darkness of the first 3 games, but it's dark enough to be satisfying to sneak through and does occasionally necessitate either night vision, thermal vision, sonar, or one of the many variants on offer. Unfortunately, the shadow system is still binary. You're either hidden or you're not. I would have liked the return of light and noise meters from Chaos Theory to show the extent to which you're lit up or how much noise you're making relative to the environment. In Blacklist, you don't seem to be able to make more noise when, say, sneaking up on an enemy in the middle of a gunfight than in a silent room. Oh, and that silly black and white effect for when you're hidden has been removed. Peeking under doors is smoother and doesn't require an awkward transition to a menu screen anymore. You can make noise to attract enemies, and overall you have a lot of stealth gear. In addition to stun guns and a crossbow, you have sleeping gas, tear gas, the sticky cameras that release tear gas, and even a cool little drone that can fly around and shock enemies. This feels very Watch Dogs. I know for some people the drone is likely a symbol of Splinter Cell going too far or getting detached from its roots, but to me it feels like a sensible step forward, and I enjoyed using it, although I did so sparingly because it can be a bit of an automatic win button otherwise. The drone has 4 shots and can clear out most rooms, and it's not on a cooldown timer so long as you withdraw it before it gets shot down. The HUD also returns. I'm not usually the type of person to rally to the defence of an informative HUD. They often have too much information and you end up looking at the edges of the screen more than the action. However, Blacklist strikes a good balance and it also fits the theme. Fisher is an agent within a secret branch of the US government and he has access to a lot of sophisticated tech. For the character, information about nearby enemies and the like is available on the screen on his wrist, but players don't have that luxury. It's therefore understandable and beneficial for the information to be presented on the screen instead, and I think it improves the game. Not everything needs to look like an interactive movie, and HUDs don't need to ruin immersion if they are consistent with the themes. The ability to pick up and throw items like bottles and bricks is still missing, strangely, although it wasn't something I ever needed given that you start each mission with 3 sticky noisemakers and can resupply frequently. Blacklist keeps the mark and execute system from Conviction but improves on it. Conviction was so glued to what it called PEV, Prepare, Execute, Vanish, that each section of each mission felt much the same. You charged up the mark and execute feature by using a melee takedown, so of course each area had an enemy conveniently on his own nearby just waiting to be taken down so you could charge up the mark and execute meter. Not only does Blacklist provide a lot of options for completing missions without engaging in combat at all, it provides more freedom for how you charge up the mark and execute meter if that is what you want to do. So a headshot now counts, for example. The meter also needs more of these actions to become fully charged, so you have to do more work before relying on it. The map design in Blacklist is also a big step up from Conviction, which if you remember had long sections without any kind of interactivity or thought required from the player at all. However, Blacklist's maps are still in the same style as those of Conviction, meaning that you are moving from point A to point B to point C in a fairly linear fashion. After each separate section you cross a point of no return and then can't backtrack. This is opposed to, again, Chaos Theory, which had more open map design where you could usually explore the entire level at all times. I obviously prefer the style of Chaos Theory, but regardless these maps do have wider open areas than Conviction. Ultimately though, Blacklist's maps are of a consistently high quality across the board, and yet none of them stand out as that special or memorable. As you'll know if you've watched the previous videos in this series, I'm a big fan of levels like the bank robbery and bathhouse from Chaos Theory, and there's simply nothing like those here. You could certainly argue this is consistent with the story, and the Splinter Cell games have always had serious and kind of dull levels like embassies, factories and office blocks, but the best of those games sprinkled in something a little out of the ordinary, like having Fisher explore populated city streets in Jerusalem and breaking into a TV studio to capture the big bad at the end of Pandora Tomorrow. Exceptions in Blacklist include the Chicago level that has Fisher sneaking around an indoor amusement park, which is fun, the subway train section and the mansion. These levels are cool, but they don't hit the highs of other classic missions. The London one is also good. An abandoned warehouse isn't that visually stimulating, but the level as a whole is dripping with atmosphere and there's a lot of verticality. Blacklist's levels are also a lot longer than those of Conviction. My overall playtime came in at 15 hours and that doesn't include all the optional content. That's a big step up from the 5 hours Conviction offered. The optional content takes the form of 4th echelon missions for people aboard the Paladin. The missions are themed around a certain skill set and have appropriate rewards, so depending on what approach you're taking in the main game, you may want to complete the corresponding missions. Grimm's missions are all about stealth, so naturally I did them straight away. They are hard and I ended up turning the difficulty down to normal for these. You have to recover information from 3 places and there are no save points. You cannot be spotted or you have to start from scratch. Some of the times I was spotted were a little harsh and inconsistent because enemies are allowed to know about your presence, for example via finding dead bodies. They just can't actually see you. Once I snuck into a sniper's tower and took him out, and then proceeded to snipe at some nearby enemies. I shot one of them but it only knocked off his helmet and I triggered an immediate fail state from some distance. It would be one thing if you had to 100% ghost the levels, not doing any takedowns at all. But it's weird that your presence can be known, you just can't be expressly seen. Grimm's missions were the hardest part of the game for me, although I did do them early in the story, and they unlocked the best stealth gear for use in the rest of the campaign, which I guess made that easier by comparison. One of the reasons I likely found Grimm's missions challenging is that, along with all the other optional content, it is at least partly designed to be played in co-op. Having 2 players means you can either split the map between you or work together to take down enemies at the same time, which will certainly make it easier to access some of the more heavily guarded spots. There are also shortcuts that are only available when both players are together, such as breaking down doors or giving boosts up to high places. However, I didn't feel I was missing out too much with these. It was never that hard to just take a longer route, and there were often objectives that I needed to get on the way around anyway. Coben's missions are also stealth themed, but a bit dull. You basically have to clear maps of enemies either lethally or non-lethally. These areas play out a lot like camps in Assassin's Creed actually, and perhaps if I wasn't so tired of the system from those games I would have enjoyed this one more. As it stands, it felt like a waste of time. I didn't complete all of Charlie's missions. Not only are they quite difficult by yourself, they are clearly meant for those going with the assault route. Trying to do these on the harder difficulties with just the early assault rifle was way too hard, and also just dull. Your main goal is to survive 20 waves of enemies, but I was more than ready to check out at the first offer after 5 waves. I don't really enjoy playing wave-based shooters by myself at the best of times. I certainly don't enjoy it within a game where the shooting is this flawed. Finally, there are the Briggs missions. I can't tell you anything about these because co-op is mandatory on these ones. It looks like one of you plays as Fisher and the other plays as Briggs, which you do briefly in the main campaign. Briggs' part plays out like a first-person shooter and the experience is functional enough, although the mix of stealth and shooting is particularly awkward here. On the harder difficulties at least, you still want to sneak past enemies where possible, you just don't have many stealth abilities with which to do so. Speaking of the co-op stuff, I was once again unable to play the multiplayer because while the game is still online I couldn't find anyone to play against. Fortunately I did play this a bit years ago, so at least have some memory of it. Enough to know that I liked it anyway, not enough to give meaningful analysis. Spies vs Mercs returns and is definitely the best part of the experience. Although the last time I was able to get any games in, people seemed to solely be playing the boring deathmatch mode. I'd love to see Ubisoft take another proper stab at this. I'm convinced the idea has a lot of potential that hasn't been reached yet, partly because the development teams change for each game, so lessons from one game don't seem to get passed to the next. Ubisoft's experience with the phenomenally successful Rainbow Six Siege should mean it has a huge talent pool to create a Splinter Cell Spies vs Mercs multiplayer. A controversial addition for Blacklist was a full economy that lets you buy new weapons, clothes and gadgets, plus upgrades for those weapons, clothes and gadgets, and even improve your base camp. You earn money by completing missions, with slightly more given for taking a stealthy route versus an all-out assault. But either way, you should have plenty to spend where you like according to your playstyle. My first impression when clicking through the store and all the other options was that it was simply too much. You don't just buy a new outfit every now and again. There are separate options for gloves, torso, optics and boots. And within those categories there are subcategories for different types of gear depending on whether you want to focus on Ghost, Panther or Assault styles. And then once you have the clothing or weapons or gadgets that you want, you can go to a separate upgrade tree to enhance them all. It's a lot. Oh, and then you have all the bullshit parts, like some gear only being available once you've acquired it via Uplay points or you've played the mobile game and all that nonsense. Despite being a touch overwhelmed at first, I grew to like the system. Well, most of it anyway. It's a lot like what Ubisoft Montreal was going for with the black market in the original version of Conviction that got scrapped. You earn money by playing and then spend that money on the path you would most like to develop. The upgrades make a difference, although perhaps not quite as much as you might think from the way the skill points are presented. The difference between being at 0 stealth and full stealth is that you no longer have to move at the slowest possible speed if you want to sneak up on an enemy. That's obviously a big deal, although it should be noted that even if the enemies hear you sneaking up, you have a short period of time to knock them out before they raise the alarm, so it's not necessarily going to change the way you play the game. The biggest benefit to upgrading stealth is that you can carry more gadgets, and more gadgets mean more options and effectively more ammo of a sort, because in addition to carrying, say, 3 noisemakers, you can also have 3 sticky cameras, 3 sleeping gas grenades, a drone, and so on. And there are a lot of guns to buy if you're that way inclined. I still could have done without the option of upgrading the individual items of gear. That felt a bit unnecessary, as was all the tacked on stuff with mobile games and what have you. Otherwise though, I enjoyed it. The gear was an extra incentive to stick with a Ghost style playthrough and then completely optional content, and it was a solid if uninspired way of including a bit of in-game progression without making Fisher feel completely inept at the start. You can also upgrade the plane. This is more expensive, although still easily achievable, and gives broader bonuses such as access to more loadouts, new prototype and black market weapons, and quicker health regeneration in the field. This part felt a bit tacked on too, especially because the plane itself doesn't change in many noticeable ways as you spend the money. Upgrading your home base in a game can be fun, but when the home base is a plane that never lands, there's not a lot you can do. I enjoyed most of Blacklist. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's the second best Splinter Cell game after, well, you know what. It's 100% unarguably better than Double Agent and Conviction. I preferred it to Pandora Tomorrow, and going by my recent 2019 playthrough, I will say that it is a better game than the original Splinter Cell as well, which has understandably aged a bit. I'm willing to debate that last one though. There was clearly room for improvement in Blacklist, however for the first time since Chaos Theory, Ubisoft had a solid base to work with going forward, and it should have been easy to iterate and improve from here. Except of course we haven't had any Splinter Cell games in the 7 years since Blacklist, and it doesn't look like one is on the horizon. We've had a Fisher cameo in Wildlands, there's some mobile strategy game he's going to be in, and there are lots of rumours he's going to pop up in Rainbow Six Siege. That's not enough for me. But there's no arguing with sales numbers, and Blacklist did not sell all that well. This isn't Blacklist's fault, rather the blame lies with Double Agent and Conviction. The Splinter Cell series got a lot of support based on games like Chaos Theory, but that goodwill can only carry on for so long. Once you've had a couple of bad or disappointing entries, the fanbase starts to lose faith. I think we saw this a bit with Resident Evil 7. Resident Evil 4 was excellent, critically and commercially acclaimed, and it's the series equivalent of Chaos Theory. Resident Evil 5 and 6 were less good. They sold well, however, largely on the back of Resident Evil 4's success. Then came Resident Evil 7, which marked a huge return to form, and yet it sold poorly because people had lost interest in the series. I'd say something similar happened with Watch Dogs 2, which was actually a decent game and developed by Ubisoft Toronto by the way, but it was so tarnished by the legacy of the first game that it didn't sell well. I'm convinced there is still a market for good Splinter Cell games. That market is likely smaller than the one for Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, but it could still be profitable for Ubisoft even if it isn't a good fit for the microtransaction live service crap that Ubisoft keeps pushing. As a huge fan of modern Hitman games, I think IO Interactive has shown Ubisoft the way forward, namely big open maps with loads of options for how to complete the assignment. You'd have to take out a lot of the sillier stuff like disguises, however there's scope for more high-tech additions like drones and proper hacking. It should come as no surprise that I don't want to see an open world. That isn't a good fit for this franchise. If Ubisoft absolutely insists on the microtransaction nonsense, then keep it cosmetic and multiplayer only, and I'll deal with it. If we get all that and it still doesn't sell decent numbers, then okay, fair enough. I would accept that not enough people care about Splinter Cell and that we're a vocal minority. But come on Ubisoft, if EA can put out a new Skate game, surely you can give us Splinter Cell. I've really enjoyed going back through the Splinter Cell series for these videos. I was pleasantly surprised by how well the first game held up. Pandora Tomorrow was rough but better than I remembered. Chaos Theory is still excellent. Double Agent was worse than I remembered because I played the canon version this time, not the PlayStation 2 offshoot like I did on release. Conviction is fine if you accept it for what it is and don't have to pay anything close to $60 for such a short and limited experience. And Blacklist is actually really good. If you haven't played it, then you definitely should. I wish I'd been more positive about it before it was too late. Alright, that's it for me today and for this retrospective series on the mainline Splinter Cell games. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments what your favourite Splinter Cell game is, and prepare to defend any answer that isn't Chaos Theory. If you'd like to go the extra mile, I do have a Patreon where you can get your name in the credits and a Patreon role in my Discord server for just $1 a month. You wouldn't believe how much even a small Patreon contribution helps at the moment, and I appreciate each and every dollar. Now that this video series is complete, you will be seeing a new one from me very soon, in addition to the continuation of my long series on isometric CRPGs, with the next one being a Divinity Original Sin retrospective. I'm not 100% sure yet whether the next video will be The New Thing or Divinity. I think it will be The New Thing, but we'll see. Okay, until next time, cheers.